Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Views on Vue. This week on our panel, we have Fritz from the Vue core team.
Hello.
Divya Sasidharan, developer advocate at Netlify and Vue contributor.
Hello.
Erik Hatchett, author of Vue.js in Action.
Hey, everybody.
I'm Charles Max Wood, and I've been playing blackjack for the last little while. We've got a special guest this week, and that's Kevin Drum. Kevin, do you want to say hi?
Hello.
This episode is sponsored by KendoUI. KendoUI allows you to build better apps faster. They have a comprehensive library ranging from data grids and charts to buttons and sliders. Plus, you can use their components as plain JavaScript as well as in Angular, React, and Vue. They have a large collection of customizable popular themes like Bootstrap and Material. Go check them out at viewsonvue.com/KendoUI. Now, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Kevin Drum. I live in Virginia. I'm a remote developer for a company called Asteris out of Colorado, and they provide various imaging solutions to veterinary medicine industry, veterinarians and specialists. And so I actually work on a Vue app every day called Keystone Omni, which allows veterinarians and specialists to view and study their medical images like CT scans, ultrasounds, and X-rays in the browser, and they can annotate, study them, share them with other veterinarians. And so that's what I do. And obviously the reason I'm on the show today is because I created a blackjack game with Vue.
Nice. And yeah, I was looking at this, and I think generally when we're looking at web applications and the kinds of things that most people are doing with Vue, they're kind of managing data and giving you different views on the data and things like that. So what makes you think, oh, blackjack, of course?
Well, my reasons were selfish, really. I just wanted something I could put in a portfolio to show a potential employer that I could build a web app. I don't have a whole lot of code out there in the wild. So I wanted to make something that was more fun than just an e-commerce site or a dashboard. And I didn't want to do anything too ambitious. So I thought, why not do a game? And I've played quite a bit of blackjack in casinos in my day, so I decided to make a blackjack game.
So what kind of
artwork out there already for that, or did you do your own?
Oh no, I did everything by hand. I don't think I used anything. I just did it in Illustrator mostly.
Nice.
I was going to ask if there are any special concerns for like making an app that is a game that you found it's different from most of the typical applications that you'll build, or making an app that uses Canvas, and we can talk about those separately if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. So in my case, I decided to not use Canvas. I just went with DOM elements for everything. So every card is a DOM element. The little coins that fly up and down are DOM elements.
So this is just HTML?
Yeah, it's all just HTML, SVG. I'm actually using the SVG use tag, use xlink href in a couple places to actually pick an SVG out of a group of SVGs. I don't know what the technical term for those SVG maps. I think maybe some people call them.
Cool. And I noticed you have some like cool, transitions and animations and stuff like that. Is that something that you found Vue helps you with a lot, or are you using other libraries for that kind of stuff?
So I decided to keep it simple. So the cards, as they come in and fly out, that's all just Vue transitions. And there are some CSS animations. So the little coin spinning at the bottom is just, I add a class to the coin and it starts spinning. There's a class that dictates whether the card is flipped over or not. But I've obviously played with GreenSock quite a bit. Thinking about using that actually in a slot machine game, sort of a side project I've been working on as well.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about GreenSock, and a lot of folks that get into animation seem to eventually wind up using it.
It's very popular in the Vue community, in large part thanks to Sarah Dresner, who is possibly better at GreenSock than GreenSock developers. She does some really awesome stuff with it, and she's helped me learn a lot.
Yeah, I think GreenSock is great, especially if you're doing really complicated things, and the performance is great. And you can actually build timelines of animation, whereas when you're just sort of animating DOM elements, it's hard to really compose animation unless you leverage things maybe like Vue transition hooks. You can kind of use sometimes to sort of chain animations as state changes. But I think GreenSock's really nice if you're doing something complex.
I was just going to ask if there's a GreenSock Vue plugin somewhere. I've never done that.
So there's not a Vue plugin in our state transitions docs, and I'll leave this in the show notes. We do have a bunch of examples using GreenSock to walk you through how to do various animations, and it works with Vue's reactivity system. So you basically just tell GreenSock to like change these values in your state, and then because the state is reactive, the Vue will automatically update accordingly. So in this case, GreenSock isn't actually touching the DOM, it's just animating the state. Although in some cases, it may be useful to have it touch the DOM as well. But something I really like to do is just keep it solely in charge of the data and transitioning that data, and then having Vue still take complete control of all the rendering.
Very cool. Yeah, I need to look those up.
That's interesting. I always worry about the performance of manipulating the data really fast if you have something that you're trying to do, 60 frames per second on, as opposed to just animating and then letting the data catch up later.
Yeah, there are always trade-offs, but I found that especially if you're using technologies like Canvas and WebGL, that this becomes pretty apparent. The Vue's data updates isn't actually the bottle point. It's the actual HTML and SVG, which happen to be slow in the browser. So you can have thousands of nodes updating every second, and it can still be very performant in HTML and SVG. And if you're using Canvas or WebGL, you can get to 100,000 nodes and still have it be really performant. And both of them can use Vue's data. It's just changing the way that rendering happens.
Okay, I think that makes sense. I think where I was thinking about in the software that I work on every day, we have ultrasound recordings that are a sequence of images, essentially like a video, and a veterinarian can play back a sequence of ultrasounds at 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second. They basically get to pick their frame rate. Problem we had at one point is we were actually mutating our Vue X state 60 times a second. And so in some browsers, it just was not able to actually keep up with what the user was wanting. We were maybe getting 30 frames per second. But a lot of that, I think, came down to the fact that we were triggering some repaints and recalculations elsewhere that we didn't need to be. So I think that's a good point. As long as you can keep your data simple and not trigger extra side effects and extra repaints, then I think it makes sense.
Yeah, it's really surprising sometimes. At least it's been surprising to me, how fast the JavaScript actually is and how fast Vue actually is. And the fact that it's really the specific technologies, like HTML and SVG that happen to be slow sometimes, but really only in extreme cases. I've been surprised how far I can push those sometimes too.
Luckily, you don't have to worry about that in your blackjack app, though. Just a few.
You don't have thousands of cards, constantly animating on the page at one time.
No. I just recently added the little stars that fly by in the background, and that's about as complicated as it gets, really.
That's a nice little touch. So those are those just divs as well, or something like that?
I'm trying to remember. I think they're just little SVGs that I have random sizes and random positions, and then they just loop an animation moving left to right. That's cool.
And just as a reminder for people, since this is open source, you can actually check it out online. We'll leave a link in the show notes. You can see how he does it and fork blackjack to make your own rules or something like that.
Yeah. I'm sure. I was tempted to go through the code and clean it up before anyone goes peeking. I'm sure there are some debugger statements in there and that sort of thing. But I hope people can learn from it. There's a lot of good lessons, I think, in terms of managing the state in Vue X. Pretty much most of the game logic lives in Vue X. I also have a small library that kind of gives you the value of various cards and kind of generates the deck and shuffles the decks. But I have Vue X actions that are called hit or stand or split. So that's really where most of the game logic lives.
That's really cool. And something I like about this use case too is that it's for people who are familiar with blackjack, at least, they know exactly what everything is supposed to do. And so it's a little bit easier, as an introduction, I think, for a lot of these concepts, because they're already familiar with the rules of the game. They don't have to learn that. They don't have to learn exactly, the specific logic for authentication or something like that. they can just see how it's implemented.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, and learning anything in the context of game development, I think is always a lot more fun than learning to make a dashboard widget or learning with some arbitrary data like foo and bar. So yeah, feel free to come in, check it out. I hope people learn something from it.
How did Vue X influence the design of your app?
So I designed it very much like a state machine. So there are booleans like is dealing, and when that's true, I disable the buttons so people can't mess with the nice dealing animations that are happening. There are the Vue X best practices, which state that you should put asynchronous operations in your actions rather than mutations. So in the actions are where you'll find some set timeouts that actually control the pace of the game. It's a little cheesy because it kind of leaves room for the animations. I think in a more elegant game where you want to make sure that things happen in order and you don't end up with these race conditions with the animations, you wouldn't want to use set timeout, but it worked great for me. My justification to myself was that even if the animations weren't there, I would still want the game to have a certain pace to it, a certain rhythm. So I left the set timeouts and the actions there.
Yeah, I was looking through the code. It makes a lot of sense what you did there. Did you run into any problems, like bugs that you had while you were dealing with the different levels of state?
Yeah, definitely. And there are still some small bugs here and there. I think the split, the animation's kind of rough. It doesn't really work right now. And as I was mentioning with the set timeouts, if you actually deal and then move to another tab and come back really quick, a lot of the cards will just sort of spill down all at once. So there's little things like that I was just willing to accept just to get the game done, really.
How do you go about designing the overall interface?
I actually drew up some mock-ups in Figma. So that helped me pick out the colors that I wanted and just the overall look. I originally was going to make this like a mutant themed game. So there was going to be, like a three-eyed Jack instead of a one-eyed Jack and things like that. But it was just too much graphic work, and I decided to simplify it. So I created these little suits, like the hearts are made up of triangles and circles, and added planets and stars. So it just kind of became a space theme.
What is Figma?
Oh, Figma is a lot like Sketch, but it's you can use it as a web app.
Oh, okay.
And how did you do the audio?
I've thought about adding some sounds, just haven't really made it a priority, but that's a good point.
That's cool. Yeah, I know that there's quite a few ways you can do audio, and I know some people would love it and some people hate it. But as a fun little, fun little project that you're using to put in your portfolio, doesn't have to have it in there. I think it's nice and succinct enough that you don't necessarily need it.
There's an app I've used, although I wouldn't recommend this for most sites. I want to strongly say this, like, don't add sound effects to your site unless it's a game or something like that, because it's annoying. But there is a sound effects generator web app that I've used sometimes, especially for like student projects to practice using the audio API and things like that. So I'll drop a link to that. I don't remember the name of it.
Yeah, definitely. We've all been in those websites that could use a lot less sound.
Yeah. I actually made a mistake as a little tangent for a client one time. As a joke, this is someone I was friendly with. And so we had this kind of rapport. I added like some smooth jazz to the background whenever the page loaded, but it backfired and they actually really liked it. And I just say, no. I said, no, we can't add it. Seriously, I won't do it. It was a joke. You were supposed to be appalled.
Yeah, I've had sounds from websites load into podcasts because I bring the website up and it starts playing. So.
Oh yeah, I hate it when in the background starts just playing. Yeah, that's so annoying.
Auto start videos on blogs. Those are pretty awful.
Well, I'll be sure to add some smooth jazz to Blackjack just for you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I guess that's a good thing we can talk about, actually, is how you would go about adding sound to a game. The way I've seen it done frequently is to simply use an audio element and assign it a ref. That way Vue can stop and play the sound within its script tags. There's also the web audio API, of course, or you could use Tone.js, which kind of simplifies the web audio API. And that way you can generate your own sound effects. I'm not sure if anyone has used that before.
Interesting. Simplifies the web audio API. Like I found the web audio API is like seems pretty good. Like it does the things that I need to do.
Well, I would say it simplifies making weird sound effects versus the web audio API.
Okay. So for like playing and generating custom sounds.
Yeah, I would say that's fair.
I see. So I was curious, we talked a little bit earlier about, Canvas and WebGL. And for people who aren't familiar with these web technologies, could you briefly explain like why you'd use it? I know you're using it in your app at work to do sort of like 3D stuff for like CT scans, ultrasounds, X-rays, and stuff like that.
Yeah. So Canvas is going to get you a pretty big performance boost because you're not moving around all these DOM elements on the page. And that's just with the 2D canvas. With WebGL, you can also start doing 3D. You can write shaders in the shader language. So I know that you've actually done a talk recently on the performance of Canvas versus WebGL.
Yeah. So if you're doing WebGL, like, do you have to like learn a new language and like learn about shaders and stuff like that?
No, not necessarily. So you've brought up before, if you're doing 3D, there are some libraries out there that allow you to componentize what would otherwise be your Canvas code. I know you've mentioned A-Frame and Vue Babylon JS were a couple where you can actually create components like block or sphere or things like that. And I think you can always do the same thing with 2D even. You could kind of create these functional components that encapsulate the JavaScript that you would normally run to generate, say, a rectangle on a 2D canvas. You can kind of put that in your script tags in a component that isn't necessarily associated with a DOM element, might not even have a template block in it, and you can use that to kind of compose a 2D canvas scene.
Cool. So like if people have already been using Vue with like HTML and maybe SVG, which is similar to HTML in the fact that it's also XML. It's also like tags that you have on the page. And if you're using A-Frame or if you're using Vue Babylon JS, you also get, essentially like HTML elements, although they're not HTML. So there are custom elements that have special behavior that hook into, in Vue Babylon's case, a library called Babylon JS, and in A-Frame's case, a library called 3JS. So they're using these underlying libraries to do more complex visualizations, but by converting it to XML, it means that it can be fully declarative, just like all of the HTML and SVG in our app, rather than having to write out a list of instructions for like, okay, like create something that will, color, that will create this color and then create this shape and blah, 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 blah.
Because normally when you're drawing a shape like in 2D canvas, you would say, let's start the point at this X and Y. Now let's extend it over here. Let's fill it in. But by being able to create a component, you can just throw all that in there and then compose them just like you would using the normal component pattern that you're used to with Vue.
Yeah, you can change it from a list of instructions that has to be run in a specific order to an element that just does what you've told it to do.
Yeah, and I had actually not heard of Vue Babylon JS until you spoke about it. But I know that Babylon JS has been used quite a bit to create 3D games. There's 3D Pool and just about anything you can think of. There's a lot of games already out there. So being able to leverage Vue's component pattern with that, I think is pretty exciting. And I wouldn't be surprised if someone's already working on a game with it right now.
Yeah, I was talking to the author of Vue Babylon JS, and he has a lot more experience with it than I do. But he likes it a lot better than A-Frame or 3JS for making games. He says it's much better optimized for that, and you can often get better performance out of it.
And now, just to make sure I have this straight, you would use something like Babylon or 3JS or the other one you mentioned if you're doing 3D games. But if you're doing a 2D game, then you have a lot more choices. You could use Canvas, or you can use just divs and SVGs and animations and Is that right?
Yeah, so Canvas element has a 2D context and a WebGL context. So the WebGL context actually allows you to write a GLSL shader language that targets the graphics card. So that's what you would use for 3D. But for most other operations, you could use 2D canvas, or you could animate DOM elements. The DOM elements are typically not going to be as performant, but if you're making a blackjack game or something like that, it works pretty well.
So how do you decide like what you're going to build your app in? Like for the blackjack game, HTML was perfectly fine. You added a little SVG, basically just for, these vector images. You didn't do anything really, really fancy with them, if I'm understanding correctly. You didn't have like dynamically generated SVGs, right?
Right.
So I am curious, like, where's the line? How do you know? Or do you just start with HTML and then port it over to Canvas or WebGL later if you need to?
I think if you're running into a performance hit when you're trying it with DOM elements, then definitely go Canvas. If you're wanting to make a decision right out the gate, I don't know if there's a good answer to that. Obviously, if you're trying to move around 1,000 DOM elements, no, just use Canvas. If it's 10 and I think then it comes down to whatever you're most comfortable with. I mean, that's why I'm using Vue to make a game, is because I'm a front-end developer, and that just seemed like a good thing to use. I'm not going to write it in Unity, even though I think a professional game developer might have defaulted to Unity or GameMaker or something like that.
I've had good performance in a lot of cases with 1,000 and even a few thousand sometimes. Yeah, it can be tricky. I usually personally try to start with HTML and SVG and then, move over if I have to. And it's usually not as much work as you think it's going to be, because writing the HTML is usually very, very easy comparatively, because you already know exactly how it works and you don't have to learn anything new. Like, how what attributes elements can take, and how to style them with CSS, very likely. And a lot of that logic you can completely reuse. Like, in fact, most of it will probably be reused when you're moving to something like Canvas or WebGL.
Would you make the argument that at a certain point when you have, like, you're trying to make this amazing game and you're trying to figure out what platform to use, you got to start thinking about native sooner or later. Like, once the game gets complicated enough, because not everybody, I don't know. I mean, would that be a consideration too? Maybe doing something Unity 3D instead of just bypassing going through WebGL or Canvas altogether?
Yeah, I think so. You really have to consider the browser performance on different devices. That could make relying on manipulating DOM elements a bit more prohibitive. But you can always package a Vue game for pretty much any native environment. I know quite a few games on Steam are packaged with Electron. Plenty of games in app stores are packaged with Cordova or Capacitor, which I think Capacitor even is now starting to experiment with packaging Electron from it. So you could, in theory, use Capacitor to create all of your native versions of your game.
Wow, yeah. Electron, that's cool. Yeah, I'd love to see which Steam games are using that and get an idea of it and see how well it works and what they were able to do with it. That's kind of an interesting idea. Did we have Electron Expert on at one point? Didn't we have an episode on that?
If we don't, I can hook us up.
That'd be cool.
But I'm playing, to give a little plug, I might not be here for picks today. I might have to leave a little bit early. So this actually goes really well into one of my picks, which is a game called Crosscode, which I've been playing a little of lately, which is a sort of like old school RPG, although it was made relatively recently, I think. And it's just such a fun game, and it uses web technologies, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like a really, really cool game using web technologies, and it just happens to run like on the desktop.
Nice. Yeah, a game that I think promoted itself as being an Electron game that's on Steam is called The Curious Expedition, and it's a roguelite set in the late 19th century. I haven't actually played it, but it looks pretty nice.
Yeah, I'm Googling it now. It looks awesome. Looks like they did a great job.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give you full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at sentry.io.
I'm also kind of curious for people who might want to get into game development. And by the way, if you have questions about doing game development from like a web developer's perspective, Pozva, that's his screen name, real name, Eduardo San Martin Marote, on the Vue team. He used to be a game developer before being a web developer, actually. So he's someone that you can add on Twitter at Pozva, P-O-S-V-A. If you have some questions about getting into game development, I'm sure he could help you.
Nice.
But I am curious for people who do want to get like really close to the metal, and let's say they want to like write their own shaders and stuff like that. First of all, I'm curious, what would you write a shader for? Like when do you need a shader? That sounds complicated. You said there's like a different language that you have to write.
Yeah, I've tried to learn it myself. It is beyond me, but there is if you go to shadertoy.com, you can see a bunch of shader language examples running in the browser that can do anything. So what you see it used for a lot, I think, is effects. So when things kind of maybe wobble and shake and morph, and you can apply hue saturation and lighting changes using GLSL. But people will use it to generate entire 3D scenes on ShaderToy. You can see just whole landscapes in 3D with clouds and the moon and trees. So the sky is pretty much the limit with that.
For those of us who don't know, what is a shader?
When it's sunny out. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So let me find a technical explanation so I don't sound dumb.
Oh, no, a technical explanation is probably not what we want, because then we probably want to understand the technical explanation.
So I think, at its basics, a shader is an algorithm that will manipulate shapes, let's say. I'm kind of winging this. I know, so there are a couple different kinds of shaders, which I'm blanking on.
It's too bad that Divya had to step out for a moment, because she actually knows the answer to this question, I think. She's worked with shaders directly more than I have. So maybe we'll come back to this, and we'll drop a link to that shader playground resource you mentioned. That sounds really cool. I want to check that out myself. I also feel a little intimidated by shaders sometimes. And by the way, having done like a tiny bit of shader development, a little gotcha that's super fun is that they are basically impossible to debug. So there's no way to, if you want to like console.log or you want to use the debugger like you're used to in JavaScript, there's just no way to do either of those things. And when something fails, it just fails silently.
I mean, surely the developers have something, or are they just that good? Do they have good hunches on what's wrong when they need to fix something?
I don't know. Maybe they just do the stare at it for a while. I've done that before on code.
Yeah, that works sometimes.
They have to basically learn to think like the shader.
How does one think like the shader? It seems very interesting. But I'm sure when you use it enough, it comes naturally.
I'm sure it doesn't come naturally to anyone, but that is interesting. And if you are using WebGL directly, it can be a bit of a learning curve. I'd say using Canvas directly is much easier. And if you're not making a 3D game or something else that needs to be in 3D, then Canvas should do the job. I would only move to WebGL when you need that 3D.
And I think Canvas has really good, I'm looking at caniuse.com. Canvas has pretty good browser support. WebGL has good browser support, but I guess the new WebGL 2.0 has pretty bad browser support. It only supported the latest. I don't know what the difference between WebGL 2.0 and the first one, but
I would imagine that if you're using 3JS or Babylon JS or the libraries that build on top of them, use these libraries, and these libraries use WebGL underneath, to provide you a nicer layer of abstraction. I'd imagine that those are probably all using 1.0, or if they are using 2.0 for something, then it would probably be marked as an experimental feature since support is still not quite there yet.
Yep, that's probably right. Yeah, actually, in fact, right on caniuse.com, they say WebGL2 context is, they call it experimental WebGL2. So maybe that's part of it.
Got it.
So let's say that I decide, you know what, this is really great. I'm really enjoying the blackjack. I want to build my own poker game or side-scroller game like Mario or something. Where do you get started with something like that?
So what I started with the blackjack game is I actually just started with text on the screen. So it didn't have any graphics. I started with the game logic first. I actually started first, let's generate a deck of cards. Then let's shuffle the deck of cards. Then let's see if I can display the cards that the dealer has and the cards that the player has, even if they're both face up right now. And so you just basically start, I think, at the core of the logic. At least that's what I did, and try to build the UI as simply as possible. So what do they call it? Developer graphics at first, I think, is what you want.
So make it work first and then make it pretty later.
Exactly. And as far as RPGs are concerned, there's some really good RPG examples out there that I found. Probably the most interesting one I found was called Pip Quest, and it is by Gregor Terrell. And he actually created a great blog post about it where he goes through how he made it. But it is a 2D RPG, and it actually uses DOM elements. There's no canvas. And the really neat thing he did was he has 6 2D maps the character can walk on that are mapped to a 3D cube using CSS transforms. So your little 2D character is actually walking on a small cube-shaped planet as you're playing it that rotates in 3D, which is pretty awesome.
I like the blog. I'm just looking up right here. One of the headlines is "Cubes are hard." So I'm guessing those 6 3D cubes were not easy at first to rationalize how you're going to program in it. But yeah, it's a pretty good explanation how he broke down for each cube. It has 6 faces and how he's figuring out the XYZ coordinates and how he's doing the transforms. Pretty impressive.
There's also a software called RPG Maker that actually uses JavaScript underneath the latest. It used to use Ruby. So if you're thinking like, wait, doesn't it use Ruby? It used to. Now everything's done in JavaScript to be a little bit more accessible to people, since more people know JavaScript than Ruby. So if you know JavaScript, you can do a lot of like RPG stuff with RPG Maker. And I think it's usually pretty expensive. When I say pretty expensive, I think more than $100. But it often goes on sale for 90% off. So if you wait for one of the Steam sales, for example, you can get it 90% off and start building some really cool games. I have some experience with it through a program that I do locally called Geek Scouts, where I have a Geek Scout building some really cool stuff with RPG Maker.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I've used Phaser quite a bit, which is a JavaScript HTML5 game library. It actually will use WebGL and then fall back to Canvas as needed. But it comes with all these libraries for doing things like particles, and it has a lot of GLSL built into it. So it can kind of make making HTML5 games a lot easier. I don't know that anyone has done anything specifically relating Vue to Phaser, but that might be interesting to see if anyone does.
We could have a Vue Phaser library.
Maybe.
And maybe you, dear listener, could be the author.
Someone created a starter pack for it. It looks like a Vue Phaser starter, but I don't see like a library for it.
I'll talk to the author of Babylon JS and see what he thinks of Phaser too. Curious, since he knows more about this stuff.
I remember when I was a kid, we used to have RPG Maker, but I think it's a different RPG Maker than the one out now. We had like a really old school one. I think they even had it for the consoles at one time, or at least the PC. I mean, it's come a long way, a lot more advanced than it was in the past, which is cool that, anybody can just start picking up. I think it's definitely a lot more accessible. I felt like, years ago, you had to learn Unity. You either had to learn Unity or C++ or C# or something to start making games. And now, anybody can, even just with simple JavaScript and some simple rules, you can make your own game. You can make your own in the browser, which is awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's how game development has really progressed is, rather than just using the same old technology, you try out a technology that might not normally be used for game development. And then you end up with all these libraries and great things that people can use going forward. I was going to say, I guess, what if someone doesn't want to build their entire game in Vue? What if they want to write their Canvas code by hand, but does Vue still provide them with anything? So I was going to kind of talk about games that use Vue just for the UI. Like maybe your game map with your little character, that's all a separate sort of game, but maybe it emits events to let the UI update. One example I've found for that is this game called Rotten Soup. And so it actually has title screens, inventory screens, and the game over screens and things like that are actually done in Vue. But then there's all this separate code that actually runs the actual canvas where the little character lives and moves around in, which I think is a pretty interesting approach, is using Vue for, a chat window or an event log that says player 1 has died or player 2 has scored this many points. I think Vue still has a place in games like that where maybe you still want to write most of your game loop, I guess, outside of Vue.
Although, is there an advantage to that, to keeping most of the game loop outside of Vue?
Well, I think if you're used to writing a game, I think in a classic pattern where there's a game loop and you're optimizing for a certain frame rate and you're counting ticks and that sort of thing, if you come from that sort of background, it might be nice for you to create a game like you're used to, but still be able to leverage what Vue has to offer and what a web app has to offer. So you can get things like chat, or you can pop up all these little modals and things like that in a browser.
I see. So when you really need to get as close to the middle as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm curious, you've worked some with SVG, at least on the designer side. Have you done any dynamic SVGs before?
I've used Vue to kind of manipulate some attributes in SVGs. I haven't done anything crazy like Sarah Drasner will do. But that option obviously is there. I think you've presented some examples of that in your last talk, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I think it's really cool that within SVG, you can make all these sorts of different shapes, and you can actually dynamically change what the shapes will be, either with an animation. Like some of my favorite stuff that Sarah's done uses the GSAP timelines, that feature where it goes through and it has characters, like blinking and stuff like that. So these are drawn with SVG, and then she's made it so that the shapes change so that it's eyelid is going down and then going up. It's so cool. But a lot of the times I'll find myself just changing the shape a little bit. And there is one example that I can drop in here actually for playing with the shape. In order to figure out what you can do with SVG and really all these technologies, I really like to make some kind of demo app at first that just has a bunch of different sliders and inputs and lets me change all the different properties of this SVG element so that I can, for example, for a polygon, give it more sides and, change how those, points animate, and change its shape and change its position and have it roll around and just, explore what are the different kinds of things that I could do with this. And that'll often give me ideas for how I might use it effectively in an app.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's really nothing holding anyone back from making a component that is a little actor in your game that is SVG based. And you just have these various methods that you can call walk, then that would essentially just update the SVG animation. I think it would be interesting to see if anyone could make an entire game using nothing but SVG animation. I'm not sure if such a thing exists other than very sort of simple examples.
So we actually did a contest at VueConf Toronto recently. If you search for, I think we used hashtag Vunicorn. We had people submit submissions with hashtag Vunicorn. And we had a lot of really cool demos building off of this code pen. We asked people to just do something fun with the VueConf Toronto logo. And we got a lot of really cool stuff, including someone who made a matching game with that logo. I think it's sort of this actually isn't part of my culture because I didn't grow up in the States, but Bop It or something like that. I think it's like that. Isn't Bop It where you have to like have different colors or something like that? And you have to, the colors blink and you have to bop them?
Yeah, Simon, I think Bop It had like where you would have to also twist something, but it was pretty similar.
Oh, okay. So I'm thinking of something a little bit different, but that's the general idea. The one that by far got the most applause was a submission by Victoria. Gosh, what's her last name again? Is it Bergquist or something? But she had a really, really cool animation where the Vue logo slowly transformed into a unicorn.
That's awesome.
It was really, really cool. So I'll drop that hashtag and some of those specific demos in the show notes so you can check them out and see how they were done.
That's pretty cool.
I have some people I'd like to transform into unicorns.
Because you think their personalities better match unicorns, or you just think...
I'm not saying.
Unicorns can still talk, you know.
Oh, well then that wouldn't solve the problem.
Yeah, they would just be
magical
powers. Yeah, all sorts of unknown powers.
You'd only be making them more powerful.
Well, then maybe not.
So this is a little secret about me that very few people know. When I was 3, if you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, it was a unicorn. And when I say 3, that's when it started. I won't say when it ended. When I found out, like, oh, that's not an option. That's not one of the things I could be. I was very upset.
Good for you. You be
All
you,
right.
Chris.
Well, anything else that we should jump on here before we do picks?
I think we've covered all the highlights.
All right. Well, Kevin, if people want to find you online, I'm assuming you blog somewhere, probably on Twitter.
I'm a terrible member of the Vue community. I contribute nothing except for blackjack. But you can find me on Twitter, Kevin Lee Drum.
This episode is brought to you by TripleByte. Applying to programming jobs sucks. You have to put the right keywords in your resume. You spend hours and hours on the phone screens and take-home projects, and that's assuming the company even responds to your application. Well, if you're a software engineer, TripleByte can help. They work with over 400 top tech companies, from big names like Dropbox and Adobe to exciting startups. You do one brief online interview with them, and if you do well, you go straight to final interviews with the company on their platform. It's like the Common App for software developers. TripleByte does not look at your resume or where you went to school. All they care about is if you can code. I've helped dozens of software developers with various credentials get jobs, and this looks like a terrific way for you to get in and get interviewed and get a job without a lot of the hassle and overhead. You can go check them out at triplebyte.com/view. That's triplebyte.com, byte as in 8 bits. As a special offer for listeners of this show, if you take a job through TripleByte, they'll offer you a $1,000 signing bonus. All right. Let's go ahead and do some picks. Eric, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah, I've just been playing around a lot on my own YouTube channel at eric.video, just doing small little Vue tutorials. I was just trying. There was an article that I'll put here in the chat. Someone was trying to debate whether Vue Axios was a library that people should be using because you can so simply add Axios to your Vue app. So I thought that was an interesting discussion. People are using Vue Prototype to add in Axios compared to using the library. So I that's my pick for today, is just kind of thinking about when you should add libraries to your Vue app versus when you should just import them in, and what the benefits of each are. Did you see that one, Chris?
I don't know if I did.
No.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. People were arguing that by using the Vue Axios library, it becomes immutable versus doing it yourself. That was about the only argument for it that I saw, but I could be wrong.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so that we'll have that article in the show notes.
All righty. Chris, do you have some picks for us?
I do. So my first pick was Crosscode, which I talked about earlier. It's a really cool RPG. And when I say really cool, I mean it has a compelling story, a pretty unique premise. Like it's not the same like fantasy premise that I've seen in so many RPGs that I just find kind of boring at this point. And it has like really fun, challenging combat, although you can make it less challenging if you need to. And it has some fun puzzles. Really, I find myself, this is going to sound perhaps strange and to some people blasphemous, but when I played Breath of the Wild, this is really what I was looking for when I played Breath of the Wild. It kind of reminds me of like the feeling that I would get playing Zelda and loving Zelda when I was younger. And in Breath of the Wild, I I just didn't get that. It felt like
What?
No.
it felt kind of empty to me. But that's just me, and a lot of people really, really enjoyed it. And I actually really enjoyed a lot of parts of it. It just didn't scratch that particular itch like I wanted it to. But Crosscode totally does. It's just a masterfully put together game. And I think this is a testament to how good it is. I have never had to load in the game. Like a lot of game premises, when you get down to it, is like, oh, okay, so, you're this person and you have some powers. Oh yeah, and also you can travel through time. Like you can travel to any point in the past whenever you want. I mean, that any game where you can like save and load, that's essentially the premise. And when you find yourself like constantly like loading because like, oh, I died and something else happened. But like I've never had to do that, not because I've never died or anything like that, but because everything is incorporated into the gameplay. I don't even know if you can load. I know that if you quit, you can continue, but I don't know if you can load. So this just shows like how good the game is and how immersive it is. Like you're never taken out and reminded like, oh yeah, this is just a stupid game.
And it looks like it kind of has like that Super NES look and feel. So if you have that like 16-bit feel, it says.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, I've been playing the Super NES Classic with my kids, and we were like playing Secret of Mana. I got a little nostalgic for it. So yeah, definitely have to check this out. Crosscode.
Yeah, it also reminds me, I think, in a lot of ways of Earthbound.
Ah, that's a great one too.
On the SNES, which is one of my favorite RPGs. I think I've played and beat that one 4 times. And my other pick is to check out the VueConf US workshops. At the time of recording, we still don't have all the workshops up yet, but by the time of release, we will. So when you are hearing this, go to vueconf.us/workshops. And I am so excited about some of these. And in fact, we have some people that I've been wanting to get to do a workshop for a while who, like for the first time at a major conference, are actually able to share their knowledge in some of this content. And it's so good. Definitely check it out at vueconf.us/workshops. I'll drop that in the show notes too.
And you'll be teaching a workshop too, right?
I'll be teaching a workshop too, but
awesome.
I mean, people tend to enjoy my workshop, but the ones I'm most excited about are from people who I don't always see workshops from, but have a ton of like domain knowledge that people need to know about, and have like a curriculum for their workshops that I am incredibly excited about. Divya is one of them, actually.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I see Vue Vixens here. I see Sarah Drasner. We've got
Sarah actually just recently had to drop out. So by the time that this is coming out, Sarah will be removed from the site.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Unfortunately.
Cool. And where is VueConf US being held again?
That's in Tampa, Florida.
Nice. Oh, that's exciting.
And that's in March.
Yep.
We need to get a Vue conference on the West Coast. We haven't had that. What was it? The first year was like in Louisiana and then Tampa.
Joe Weems is actually thinking about perhaps organizing something.
Ooh. Oh, well, we'll have to
he's
get
thinking about it. It's not definite yet, but he's going with the idea.
Nice. All right, I'm going to jump in with some picks here. So I decided that I am going to run a marathon in 2019.
Nice.
Yeah. I picked the St. George Marathon, which is here in Utah, for a variety of reasons. One is that it's not that far away. 2, I like going to St. George. And 3, when I was like 10, my dad ran the St. George Marathon. And, we lost him this last year. And it's just, I guess, kind of a way for me to connect. So anyway, I'm pretty excited. But I also realized that my running pattern goes something like, I get really excited about running for a few weeks. And so I do it and I do it and I do it. And then I either get burned out on it or I, get busy or lazy or something and I quit. And so I needed some form of accountability. So I hired a running coach. And I'll go ahead and put the link to the company that I hired to help me do the running. It's McCurdy Trained. It's MCKIRDY trained.com. And so they use an app to give me my workouts. I can text my coach whenever I need pointers, and it's been really, really great. My coach has been awesome, and she's really kind of helped me figure some of this stuff out. One other thing that I did, and this was so my workouts right now, I run for an interval and then I walk for an interval, and I had a Fitbit Blaze, but you can't really program intervals into that, but you can on the Garmin Forerunner watch. So I have a Garmin Forerunner 235 that I got myself, and I really like it as a watch. It looks really nice. But yeah, I just get in. It's freaking cold outside, so right now I tell it I'm running indoors on a treadmill, and it keeps track of all of my stuff for me. And anyway, it's been terrific that way too. So I've really been liking that. So I'm going to pick that. I would tell you what kind of running shoes I have because it seems like runners all do that. But I bought them quite a while ago, and I don't remember what brand they are. So I'll have to pick them on a future episode. But yeah, I'm excited about that. So St. George Marathon is in October. So if you want to come see how slow I am or cheer me on as I finish my first marathon, whatever. But yeah. Kevin, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah. So my first pick is the recently released Refactoring UI book from Steve Sugar and Adam Webben. Adam and Steve have been providing a lot of great web design advice for a while now under this Refactoring UI brand. And I believe this is their first commercial offering. At its core, it's a PDF that contains Steve and Adam's sort of combined knowledge of all things web design. But it also includes some great supplemental material, like a component gallery that has like a collection of UI patterns for various things like forms and navigation. I think it contains like every way you could think of to style just a button. So it's pretty awesome. It also has font recommendations, color palettes. There are some screencast videos included, and it even comes with a icon library that you can customize with CSS to use your own brand colors. So it's a pretty awesome design resource kit, especially for front-end developers like myself who often find themselves in the role of a designer. My second pick, since we talked about games, is Game Programming Patterns by Robert Nystrom. And this is a book that came out 4 or 5 years ago, and it goes over all the design patterns that are frequently found in games, like game loop, event queues, dirty flags. But it also talks about a lot of the old design patterns from the book by the Gang of Four and talks about how they apply to game development. But even if you aren't looking to develop a game, as I was kind of saying earlier, just learning these patterns in the context of game development makes it a lot more interesting and a lot more fun. So those are my 2 picks.
Nice. Well, thank you for coming, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and we will be back next week. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.